Ready? Okay, this is Jigging 101 with Doug Stewart. I'm going to teach you my jigging method that I use all over the country, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. My wife and I live waterfront at Buckeye Lake, and we've been out there 10 years. I've fished all over the country. I got lucky. My daughter became a flight attendant for Southwest Airlines and married a pilot. She moved to Orlando, and Let me move
your speaker up a little bit here.
Okay. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. Right. Usually I don't even need a mic. My wife complains I talk too loud. Anyways, the wife and I moved out there 10 years ago, but my daughter became a flight attendant and has a place in Orlando. She built an apartment for the wife and I, so we have a free place to stay down there. I just got back the day before yesterday. I was down there fishing. The weather was better up here than it was down there. It was high temperatures of 66, and those people were in winter coats. I thought it was fine, but they didn't think it was so nice. But I have a little boat down there, and I do a lot of bass fishing down there. Up here, I fish for steelhead trout. I'm known for my saugeye fishing. I'm known for ice fishing. I fish wherever and whenever I can. Right now, I only have one sponsor. I acquired the sponsor 46 years ago. Her name's Cindy. She's not real happy about it today. She wasn't happy about it then, but she purchases all my fishing gear. I don't have any other anybody that gives me anything. The stuff that I use is stuff that I pay for or she pays for, and so nobody tells me what to use or I don't have to sell anything to you people. It's what I use. So. First, we'll talk about my jigging method a little bit. A lot of it has to do with the rod and reel. So, the first thing when I post pictures on Facebook, people ask me, well, what lure were you using? And I tell them I was using a Berkeley power bait minnow. Everybody knows that's what I use. But that's only 50% of it. The rest of it is the rod, the reel, the line, the knot. Everything is a tool, and you have to use the right combination for whatever jig that you're using. Well, I've mastered this one jigging method with the type of bait that I'm using. I use a 7-foot medium or medium light spinning rod with a 2500 size reel. I use 8-pound test Vanish fluorocarbon line. It's the cheapest. My sponsor doesn't like I said, she doesn't like buying me stuff, so I use the cheapest stuff I can. I try to catch as many fish as I can with the cheapest stuff. This stuff is hard to use though. If you ever put it on a reel, it'll give you fits. Most people use fluorocarbon line one time and they'll never use it again because of how it acts up. But the key to using this line is having a reel that it works on. A lot of places, even the stores that sell the reels, they don't even know that you can adjust a reel for the type of line that you're using. What I do is, and I don't know what all reels do it. I know that Shimano reels, they're from the $100 Noski all the way up to the Stella like this. They all are adjustable for the line. And what I mean by adjustable is we take the spool off, and there's some little black nylon washers on that shaft. You take 2 or 3 of those off, and it wraps more line to the front of the spool than the back of the spool. That makes this fluorocarbon line work much better. If you don't do that, you'll go to cast and you have a big ball line and twist and it'll give you a fits. But that's the reason I use 100% fluorocarbon line is because of the features that it has. First, it's very invisible to the fish. They can't see it. Old guys like me can't see it either, so it's hard to get the line through the eye on the lures to tie them on. But the other feature that this fluorocarbon line has is that it sinks. So by sinking, if I'm using an 1/8 ounce jig like this, if I'm using monofilament line that floats, however much that floats, it's acting like a bobber on this jig. So I don't feel that jig. But with the fluorocarbon line, it sinks. I feel every bit of the weight of that jig. So with my jigging method, if anything touches that jig, I know it instantly because I'm feeling it. So my method, I make long casts and I do a lift and flutter retrieve. I'll make a very long cast, I'll lift it up, I'll crank down, I hold the rod up high when I do that so that I can feel that jig constantly. I lift it up, I do a couple cranks to take up the slack, I let that jig flutter down. That triggers an instinct hit when they see it. They can't help but to hit it. And they always hit it on the fall. They'll hit it right before it hits bottom. Now in the wintertime, I tend to use the small 3-inch power bait minnows with 1/8 ounce head, and then I put a stinger hook on there. I'll show you, I'll send out a couple examples of the stinger hooks that I use. I use 2-inch and 3-inch. You can pass those around. If I'm using a 3-inch jig, I use a 2-inch stinger hook. In the wintertime, a lot of times what happens is these saw guys will come in and they'll just nip at it. They're not feeding, they're not hungry. You'll just aggravate them to where they'll nip at it and they get that stinger hook, especially in the cold months. And that's why I use a small one, a small bait, so that they have a better chance of getting hooked up in the colder months. Now most of the time, I'll use a 4-inch with a 1/8 ounce head on the shallow lakes like Buckeye. But when I go to the deeper water, if I'm fishing alum or Hoover or that, I'll probably use a 1/4 ounce. So like anything below 6 foot or 7 foot deep, I use an 1/8 ounce. If I'm fishing deeper water like at these other lakes, I'll go with a 1/4 ounce up to maybe 20 feet deep. Now when I go on Lake Erie, when I fish for the walleyes up there on Erie, I'll use a 3/8 ounce. That's really the only place that I'll use a 3/8 ounce because the wind and wave action, and sometimes I'm fishing down 28 feet, 25 feet, 30 feet, depending. But the key is to get the right setup for this jigging method. You want the right rod and reel, and you want the right size reel. The 2500, a lot of people I see will be using a reel that they put the wrong size line on, that it doesn't match the reel right. With the 2500 in the Shimano's, it'll have on there 6, 8, and 10 pound tests is what it says. You want to use the middle size, 8 pound. If you have a bigger reel, and then it'll say 8, 10, 12, you want to use 10 pound. But for what my jigging, anything in Ohio, I've landed steelhead trout that fought like you can't even imagine on this exact spinning rod with 8 pound test. They fight better than any fish in Ohio, I believe, and you can land saw guy. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to break off, I want to use heavier line. When you change to heavier line, what happens is you've changed the dynamics of how that jig operates and everything else. So I only know with my method, if you use 8 pound test and you use the jigs that I say until it'll work just perfect. When you start changing things, then you have to adjust. If you use heavier line, you might have to use a heavier jig. You might have to use a lighter jig or whatever. But if you would like to contact me on Facebook, and you could be my friend if you like, and I can send you all the information. Usually I have printout sheets that I pass out, but I wasn't able to do that today. But if you contact me by my name on Facebook, if you'd like to watch a video, if you didn't catch everything today, you can watch a video on YouTube that I have that is a seminar that I did in Northeast Ohio. But this is one of the setups that I use right here for winter time. Summertime, I go with the 4-inch, and this is with a 1/4 ounce head. I like the natural colors. A lot of people ask me, well, what about chartreuse and all the other different colors in that? What I've found is that in all the lakes that I've went to, all the bait fish and all the shad and everything else, they're all silvery colored. I haven't found a chartreuse or an orange shad and these fish all eat whatever's in the lake. So they manage to find that bait and they manage to eat it. So I'm a firm believer in natural colors. I don't go into any exotic colors most of the time. At one time I was, Power Bait made a glow-in-the-dark one, and they quit making that. It was a really, really good bait. It would work like fantastic, like right before dark or right at dark, but it would, at times it wouldn't work at all. So it was one of them baits that I'd throw it. If I didn't get a bite real quick, I quit throwing it. But I wish they would start making a glow-in-the-dark one. If the water is a little bit murky, I will switch to a white. They make these power baits, and I'll pass this around. Here's some of the colors. These are some of the colors I use. The white, the smelt, black shad. You can just pass those around, please. But sometimes if the water gets a little discolored, I'll use a white. That seems to work real well. You can also buy these, you can still find these. They used to make these power bait reel sticks. They used to make these in a 4-inch, and they quit making them. Everything that I like, they quit making. I used to buy the mimic minnow jig heads that I like. I used to buy those in bulk, and I went to order them one time. I'd buy them 25 in a pack, and they were about 80 cents a piece. I went to order them one time, and they said they don't sell them like that anymore. So the only other option they had was, well, you can buy them in these packs, and you got 2 for $3.50 with a tail on it that I didn't want. So I've got, if anybody wants to buy paddle tails, I've got boxes and boxes of paddle tails. I just want the heads. I don't really care about the tails. These are the best hooks on a jig that I've found. They have a wire on them. They did start selling one with they call the mimic minnow head, and it's not the same. It has a lead keeper on it. It doesn't have the wire like these older ones do. These were the best they ever made. You can. This is an 1/8. This is a 1/4. You can look at the. I'll pass around some of the heads. Now, Walmart has a cheap imitation. Here, I'll pass these out so you can see these also. These are the jig heads that I prefer. Right there, those. Now, I'll give you these too. But these are Walmart brand here. They come in 1/8 ounce. There's only 2 colors, chartreuse and blue. I don't get hung up on the colors. I get whatever color of heads that I can find. I haven't found any difference in it. It's a lead head, and it makes the thing sink. But these were 2 for $1, where I was paying $3.50 for two heads. I was getting these for $1. Now, since they're 1/8 ounce, I use them in the winter a lot of time, and with a stinger hook. Even though it's not as good of a hook, it's still good enough with the stinger hook. So I'll pass those around also. These are a Walmart Ozark Trail brand. Cheaper, but they work. And then, like I say, you can still find these at places. They're called the reel sticks. They're 3-inch, 2 of them come with a lead head in them already, and the rest don't, so you have to buy heads. So that's why I purchased the other heads, so I have plenty. But these are a black shad color, natural color. They work very well. A lot of us get hung up on the shore. Not everybody has a boat, so one of the things I did on the way to work, back when I had a job, I used to keep a rod in my truck set up like this with a sinker that I made myself, and I'll show you how I make these, with a floating jig head on it. Now I'd set this up. These are like snagless. You could throw them out in rocks. You could go down below a dam, and you could really fire this thing. I could make these any weight or length that I wanted by making them longer, and I could cast these up against a dam, or I could cast them way out. And what you're doing is basically fishing off the bottom with a floating jig head. You could put a tail on, and you got to remember that you're fishing upside down, so as it's going along, you got to put the tail on upside down because it's coming up from the bottom. I tie a loop knot on everything, which I'll show you the uni knot that I use. But typically with this, I'll use a heavier main line. You could use braid or whatever you want, and then use a lighter line here. So if you do get hung up, you'll only lose the floating head. You can retie, and you don't lose your sinker a lot of times. But the way I make these, and you can use these with live bait too. If you tight line, you can put a live minnow on here, and you can tight line these on the bottom, not get hung up. Just tighten the line up and just let it float. If they lift it up, if they lift that up, you'll see the line, you'll see the rod tip move, and you know you got a bite. The other thing, when you're using this, I would cast out and slowly reel it in, and then when I didn't feel the sinker anymore, I knew something lifted it up, and then I would set the hook. It's when you don't feel anything. Instead of feeling a hit, you don't feel anything. You don't feel that sinker, and you know you got one on there. I caught a lot of fish on the way to work with this. If I was going by a lake, I'd stop. I'd go an hour early to work and stop and fish a little bit and use a setup like this, just casting off the shore. But the way I make those is I would get tent cord. You could buy tent cord and get that. It comes with, when you cut it, it's got this inner strand here. You cut those out. All you want is the outer part, and you can make those any length you want. What you would do, you'd light it with a lighter, and then pinch it closed with a pair of pliers. Don't use your fingers. You only do that once. It'll stick to you. And then you fill it up with BB split shots. So I made a handy dandy little tool. You got to make sure you get the round split shots though. You don't want the ones with the little crimp on them. They'll get hung up inserting them into the nylon cord. But I made this handy tool that you could stick that tube into the line or into the cord, and then you could drop them in there, and then you can stuff them in, and you could make that out of an old fishing rod or anything. You can make something that you can stuff these and do it much faster than putting them in one at a time. It's a little handy tool that I made. What? These are BB split shots, or the size BB is what they. You want to use the smallest ones you can get so that they fit in the nylon cord. And yeah. He said he was making some. He saw my video and he made some, but he couldn't find the small BB shots, and that's what size you're looking for, size BB. And make sure they're the round ones without the pinch on them, and they work just fine. And you can make them any length that you want. I'll pass a couple of those around so you get to see it. And then what I do after I make them, I take a snap swivel. I would take a snap swivel and just stick it in the end of it. Here, I'll pass one of these around and you can see it. But those are really nice for, you know, not getting hung up. If you're in a rocky area, like down below the dams, I used to fish down below Griggs and O'Shaughnessy, and there were places where if a guy was next to me throwing a regular jig head, ball head, they'd get hung up and lose 10 before I would lose 1 of mine, because it wouldn't get hung up. And I could cast way further than them a lot of times too, and get to places that they weren't getting to. I'll pass around a couple of these jig heads so you can see them outside of the pack, and you can see the wire keeper on them. The one is the Walmart brand, the cheap one, yes, and then the other one is the bigger one is the Mimic Minnow jig head. That's the best big jig head that I've ever found to use. You can use a ball head, but the things that I like about that jig head is the shape of it. It's a wedge shape. If it gets hung up in the rocks, I can pull on the line, I can snap it, and it'll pop back out of a snag way better than a ball head. A ball head will wedge in, the lead will wedge in between 2 rocks, and that one will get you through rocks a lot better than any jig head that I know of. Plus it has the wire keeper on it that holds the plastic on there. You know, if you ever use a jig and the plastic's always falling off, it can be pretty frustrating, and that wire keeper does a real good job of that on a jig head. Now, I also use a knot. It's the uni-knot. This is my Buckeye Lake crappie jig or lure. This is what I use for the crappie out there when I want to catch big ones. But I'm going to show you the uni-knot. That I need a volunteer here. If you could hold that lure, pretend like you're a big fish. Okay, so this is the only knot that I use, and there's specific reasons that I use this knot. Okay, I go through the eye of a lure, I double the line over, and you go back through the hole 6 or 7 times. I'm not going to go all the way, but then you snug it up, you pull the tag end up, you slide it down, and I leave a half inch loop on every lure or jig that I do. People ask me, you know, why don't you just use a snap swivel? And the snap swivel will take the action away from every lure that you use it on. If you use any kind of crankbait, or the only thing you really could use a snap swivel on is a spinner or something that will twist your line. That's really the only thing that you need it on. This, the nice thing about this is, if you snug it down, wet it before you snug it down so that it doesn't burn through itself. That line will burn through itself. But when you get a hit, it'll act like a miniature shock absorber. If I've been using that jig for hours, where is it going to break? Right there where it's on that eye. It's been working on that. And if you haven't had a bite for a long time and you haven't changed it, but if you get a hit, it'll tighten it down. And that bad place on the line, it just came up through that knot, and now it's up here where it's not going to break off. It doesn't have any pressure on that. Even if your line is deteriorated, it'll still not break off. I lose very few fish because of my line or knot. And then it also, if you do get a big fish or a snag or whatever, it forces you to retie. You'll learn how to tie that knot. I can tie it in the dark with jersey gloves on, but I have a hard time getting it through the eye. That's the biggest trouble I have. Getting older, I can't see it to get it through the eye, but this knot doesn't untie. It's one that you'll get accustomed to. If you get accustomed to using that knot, I guarantee you it will catch you more fish. Plus, leaving a half-inch loop, it allows the jig to wobble and flutter way better. When you let off of it, you let it flutter down, it's not snug on that line, so it'll twist and roll and trigger that instinct hit. So that's why I like to use that. That's called the uni-knot. And like I said, if you want to contact me on Facebook, or you can, if you want to take down my email address, it's fish683@aol.com. and I can send you, it's quite a bit of information of all my jigging. Some people I've sent it to on Messenger, and they're like, "Holy crap!" You know, it looks like a small book. But I give all that information with everything that I do, so that you have it. I'm going to throw in something a little extra with the crappie fishing out at Buckeye is really popular. The fish out there are amazing. The crappie are just huge. The numbers aren't there like in other lakes. Like Hoover might have been my favorite lake for numbers of crappie, but Buckeye, living out there, I catch them on occasion. Like if the saw guy aren't biting very well, I'll go and I'll try for the crappies. But one of the things I found that works real well for me is the 1-inch gulp minnow in the smelt color or the black shad. It doesn't matter, either or. I'll pass these around also, but I buy these jig heads. I think these are the 32nd ounce or the 16th ounce. The crappies, sometimes I'll use a 16th ounce if I don't plan on getting any bluegills. If you're just getting bluegills too, you want to use the smaller jig. But I use these. I'll pass this around, and this is nice to keep at your house or in your boat. Like when my grandkids come, I don't have to go and buy minnows or anything. That stuff will work as good as a minnow, and sometimes even better. When I was guiding and taking people for panfish, a lot of times they would cringe if they found I didn't bring minnows to go catch crappies and panfish. But what I would find is that I would set them up with the minnows, and I would start using the jig, and by the time they got another minnow on, I'd have 2 fish in the live well, because I'd just throw that thing right back out and I'm taking it off in another one where the minnows would have to be replaced every time. These are handy to keep at the house, keep in your boat. And then as far as a float, I see a lot of times for the crappie and panfish, people use way too big of a float. You want them to not feel the float. And I like these little crappie floats. There's two different sizes for these. One's a little bit bigger, and they have BBs in them, and they rattle. And the shallow water at Buckeye, a lot of times that'll help attract the fish. Right now, out there, they're catching crappie in like a foot of water and setting the jig or the minnow 6 inches down under the bobber. They're up in the shallows and starting to hit now, which is kind of crazy this early. The ice fishing season was really short. I burnt myself out on it. My buddy came up from Southern Ohio and stayed with me at the house, and we went out for 6 days, every day from dawn to dusk. I had some impressive pictures, but I about killed this old man trying to fish like that. But I knew the season wasn't going to last long, and it was going to be over quick, and so we did it hard. I'm going to ask any questions. And before I go on, anybody have any questions about anything? Okay, he asked, when I lift the jig, do I do any action on the, like twitching the rod or anything like that when I let it fall? And I found that I don't have to. One of the reasons that I use a straight tail, a lot of times you go into a store and you'll see the jigs on the shelf, or they'll have the paddle tail and a twister tail and then a straight tail. Well, all these straight tails are there. Nobody gets them because they don't have any action. That's what they think. They don't have any action. So by using this method of letting it flutter and having the loop in the line, I don't have to put any action in it. When I let off of it, it will flutter and roll and twist. Where if it has a paddle tail or a twister tail, it's like a tail on a kite. It keeps it in a straight line, and it goes straight down, and then when you pull on it, it swims in a straight line. Well, the fish, they see stuff going by swimming all the time that looks completely normal. That's not what triggers an instinct hit. When that thing flutters down and twists and they see a flash of the side of it, that's what triggers the instinct hit. So you don't have to put any other action into it other than just keep the line tight, holding the rod up high as it flutters down, and then cranking it a couple turns, depending on how deep you are. And then if you're in deeper water, also just vertical jigging, like on Lake Erie at times. I charter the Sassy Sow for all my buddies I used to work with. We get that boat every year in the spring, usually after the jig bite, and I'll cast out and I'll let that jig hit the bottom, and I just lift and let it down, just straight up and down almost, as the boat's drifting a little bit. A lot of times it's just straight up and down. Especially if the boat isn't moving, that's even better to use the jig. And I've done real well up there on a head boat, catching more than everybody on the boat when they're all using bottom bouncers and spinners and everything else that aren't working. But that jig, you'd lift it up and let it flutter down and keeping tension on it the whole time. You want to keep the tension on it when it's going back down so that you feel that jig, that you feel that hit. And up on Erie, I use a stinger hook a lot of times too, because the walleye, even though they're big walleyes, they can still just come up and barely nip it and not get the main hook. They'll just get the tail of it. That help you out any? But like I say, make long casts. Do a lift and a flutter, lift and a flutter. I'll park in one area, I'll set my anchor on the talon anchor on the boat, and I'll make long casts, I'll fan cast. I'll pick an area and I'll just keep casting. And if I don't get a bite, I have enough confidence in this lure and my method that if I'm not getting fish where I'm at, I just move. If I'm there a half an hour and I don't get a fish, I go to another area. I'll find some other place. And generally, I'll find a spot that there's fish that are willing to hit. Any other questions? He asked if I lift and flutter with the floating jig, and one of the things I found with that, now I don't get top billing here. Some of the other seminars that I've done, I get to work on the tank, and I've had people film this method with the floating jig head and my other, the other method in the tank. And what you'll see with that sinker, as I'm dragging it across the bottom, it'll shake and shimmy that floating jig head and make it look so real. The fish will eat it, and then and actually they even like to eat the sinker too. I've had them in the tank. Grab that black sinker, and if I had a hook in it, I could have caught two. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
When you're scouting spot, how do you choose which spot you're going to fish?
Yeah. Okay. He asks, how do I choose a spot to fish? And people ask me a lot of times about my depth finder and on my boat, and do I spot the fish with the side scan? Do I have the forward sonar that's all high tech now? Everybody's getting that, and most of the time I don't even use my depth finder on buckeye at all. I have spots marked with the GPS, and I use that so I can get to them fast. Like it might be a rock pile. It might be a little drop off. It might be a spot that I caught fish there, and there may be nothing there. Some spots were just mud, and I don't know why, but at certain times of the year I would go there and the fish would be in that area, and I would cast and get them. So I don't use my electronics on buckeye at all, and I don't think I've seen guys using the forward sonar and all that there, and by gosh, there's many times I know the fish are in front of me. I don't have to have anything that shows me a picture of them not hitting. I know they're not hitting, and I know they're there. But you know, some guys are really into that with electronics. I see them, they're spending more time with their head looking at the electronics and looking at the depth finder and not just casting. I try to put in as many casts as I can, because every time that jig hops, there's going to be a fish that it might land in front of. And sometimes when they're in a negative mood, the window next to their head is this big. It's a foot around. If you don't drop that jig and hop it within a foot of them, they will not hit it. And then there's other times that you could do anything and they'll chase it down and they'll hit it. I used to, some of the seminars I did for a long time, I would make the comment that when they're aggressive, when they're on, they would hit anything and probably hit a cigarette butt if you put it on a jig hook. Well, last year I went to my neighbor's yard where he throws his cigarettes out, and I took 2 cigarette butts, and I went out on my dock and I put one on a jig hook, and I was catching saugeye and catfish jigging with a cigarette butt. But they don't make them in good colors. Like, I don't know, they don't have, you know, Marlboro black shad or, you know, and they don't stay on good. But when they're aggressive, they'll hit anything. And that's what's hard for people to realize, that, you know, you go out one day and you might have a great day on a, you know, on a pink flicker shad, and then you go back and it never works again. And it's because you hit it when they were feeding. And that's what makes my jigging method so effective, is that it works no matter what. I mean, there's going to be times that, you know, there's always times that maybe a certain time of day they don't hit, or a certain time, you know, if the weather's bad or the water gets stirred up pretty mucky, there's going to be times they don't hit, but it always works. If I'm not catching fish, I'm not in the right place, so I'll just keep going. I'll move. If I'm there a half hour and I don't get fish, I'll go and I'll try to another spot. And then I've had days where I absolutely didn't catch a fish for 6 hours, and then I would hit a spot and catch 8 in less than an hour. Just, you know, because I was persistent. And what happens a lot of times, people, when they aren't catching fish, what do? You go to the tackle box. Well, it must be the lure. You change the lure. Well, then you move. And then now you had the right lure, but you're in the wrong spot. And then now you moved, and you're making all these variables that make it difficult. That's what makes my method so good for me. I know that it works. I don't have to wonder. And I don't have to wonder anywhere in the country that I go that it works. I've caught rainbow trout and cutthroat trout out west in the rivers out there. I was amazed that they hit the 3-inch jig, you know, real good. I caught smallmouth bass and largemouth up in Maine. I've caught crappie and largemouth. I've caught largemouth up to 8 pounds on the jig down in Florida when they were in a negative mood. In the wintertime down there, I was down there for a couple weeks, just got back to come to the show, but the cold fronts were coming through and the fish were not wanting to hit. But with that jigging method, I could get the bass to hit if I hit them right on the head with the jig. If I could figure out where they were, they would hit. Any other questions? Anything? We got plenty of time here. We got another 15 minutes, so I'll tell you a little story about this jigging method. The first time I used it down in Florida, I had a buddy down there that was a tournament bass fisherman, and he offered to take me out on, I think it was the Harris or Butler chain of lakes. And he said his other buddy was already out there catching fish. So we jump on the bass boat and we run through 2 or 3 lakes, and we get out there, and his buddy has a marker buoy out in this deeper water where the fish were stacked up. So the first thing I do, I don't know this lake at all. I've never been there. And so I get a 4-inch out with a 1/4 ounce head and tie it on, and I cast out right where this guy has his marker buoy. It sinks down. I'm waiting for it to hit the bottom, and it's going down, and I thought, well, that felt like a hit. So it didn't get to the bottom. So I set the hook and I bring it up, and I got a 4-pound bass. I take a picture of it. Oh, that's cool, you know, first cast. That's a bad sign though, catching one of the first casts. That usually means you're going to really do bad that day. But I caught that one, So I make my second cast, and I cast it out by the guy's marker buoy, and it sinks down. Same thing, it goes almost to the bottom. Boom, I get a hit. Pull it up, another 4-pound bass. I take a picture of it, and I go and make my third cast. After the commotion, taking a picture and everything, I make my third cast, and it doesn't go down all the way, and it goes down about halfway, and I thought it felt like something, but I wasn't quite sure, so I set the hook and I bring it in. It's a 13-inch crappie. That was my third cast. So I make my fourth cast, and it sinks all the way down. Now I know that it's 25 feet. The jig finally hit the bottom. I bring it in, and this guy in the other boat yells over. He goes, "What's the matter? Is your lure broken?" I go, "It must be. You know, it quit working on me all of a sudden." But I went on that day. There was actually a bass tournament on that lake, and guys were coming over, and they would see me, you know, "Hey, you know, take a picture," and they were coming over and asked me, "What are you using, dude? What are you using?" Because, you know, they're struggling. It was in the winter down there, and they, you know, down there, they don't have to finesse fish like we do in Ohio. If you know, Ohio fishermen, you know what tough fishing is, and when you go to a place that actually has fish and they like to bite, it can be really good for us. Yeah, they were coming over and wanting to know, and of course me being a smart whatever, I told them, I said, "Well, I'm using this rubber minnow thingy. And I'm from Ohio, and and I'm just using this rubber minnow thingy. I guess I'm just getting lucky, and just played stupid. But I went on to catch a lot of fish that day. Just and it impressed these guys that were tournament bass fishermen. And I did that many other times down there in different places. But last week the shallower lakes I went to, they were hitting big rubber worms. So, any questions? Anybody have anything at all? Anything about Buckeye Lake? Buckeye Lake is really coming up. They've got a lot of plans. There's plans for making a new pier out there at the North Bank launch. It may have a restaurant on it and a bait store. I don't know what all they're going to do, but they're always coming up with new stuff out there. It's getting they keep on digging more and more canals. They keep adding huge areas to the lake. More and more people are building houses. Every place that there's an open spot, they're hammering a house together. The people next to us tore down their house and are building a new house, so we get to listen to pounding all the time. So after I do this show, I'm going to take off and go back to Florida for a few weeks and do some bass fishing down there with my boat, and then come back. I'll be doing another seminar out at Vance's in Hebron on the 2nd of March. So I don't know what time, but I'll be out there at Vance's. So, and like I say, if you'd like to look me up on Facebook, I'll send you more information than you could imagine, and so you'll have all this stuff at your fingertips to go get it if you want to. Anything else? Anybody have anything? All right. Well, thanks for coming out. I appreciate you coming out and supporting the show. And you can always contact me on Facebook. I give a report about every day or two. So.
You folks